Hey, happy Halloween, ladies and gentlemen. Today I wanted to go over my top 10 favorite horror comics of all time because it is Halloween and that fits the vibe so perfectly. Happy Halloween because I hope you guys and your families are doing well. But without further ado, let's get started with my number 10 pick for my favorite horror comic of all time, Grimm. It's about a Grim Reaper, as you might be able to see, who finds out that one day the living can see her. She doesn't understand why exactly, but she knows it all has to do with some sort of mystery about her upbringing. And this is cheating a little bit because it isn't exactly horror, but it is very well done. Imagine one day you're just invisible. That's how you lived your whole life. And then one day, people can see you. And you don't know how the hell you're gonna come to terms with that. But there is a ton of amazing villains in Grimm, tons of great art, great mystery, insane plot twists that happen to and from. And of course, it is kind of scary at times. I think this has some of the best artwork in the entire list today. I really love this book. It's relatively new as well. But the shading here, the action, the mystery as to what the fuck happened to Jessica Harrow here, it's really just well done, well crafted. Stephanie Phillips has done a wonderful job with the suspense, with really everything here. I'm invested in the characters as well. And the book, of course, is just beautiful. It has a really nice modern spin on a lot of topics that you'd expect from a Grim Reaper type of story. Like the Grim Reaper himself, what's his role to play in the story? It's not as simple as it might seem. So I'd really recommend, if you are interested in a story about like a mystery, thriller, action, about a Grim Reaper who finds herself in a very strange situation, I'd really recommend checking out this book. Now, my number 9 pick for the greatest horror comic that I've ever read is from someone who I would consider to be one of the greatest, probably the big 3 of the best horror comics writers of our modern generation. And that is, of course, James Tynion IV. Now, this is a book called The Closet, and I really think it embellishes a lot of James Tynion's strengths. Because in horror, your goal is, of course, to scare your readers, but I think it's also to really hone in on what it is about these horror elements that actually scare people. Right? Because if it's just ghosts and ghouls and there's no real attachment to the characters, just a lot of jump scares, I think that's a lot of what is wrong with modern movies today and how they approach horror. But The Closet does an amazing job at really just honing in on what scares us as humans in the grounded aspects of life. The Closet is about a family who keeps moving. It's about a father and his son. Now, this child, Jamie, sees monsters in his bedroom closet. And of course, like, we all had an experience like that. Maybe they didn't quite look like this in the freakish way they're depicted in this book. But you find out as you go through the book that maybe it's not actually just a ghoul, just a ghost or a zombie that's hiding in his closet and he's imagining it. No, maybe it's something worse. Because you find out as you go through the book, at its heart, it's a story about abuse. This child, Jamie, has been through a really tough time. His dad, as you find out, is causing these visions to see the monster in his closet because, unfortunately, he's an abusive father. And you get to know this by a conversation he has with his best friend, and you realize, oh, this guy's kind of an asshole. And from then on, it starts to make sense, and you feel really bad for the kid. You're terrified for the kid because you can understand what he's going through. It's unavoidable, it's terrifying, it drags him away, and you don't really know how the hell you handle an abusive father as a child Jamie's age. He's 4 years old in this book, by the way. And we have this line that his friend tells him, how there's no such thing as fresh starts. If you don't work through anything, it just stays there like a cancer. And abuse, of course, it's never really dealt with. Not really. It messes kids up. It leaves them with scars they can't really hope to heal. And his father is like, okay, I'm going to be a good father to Jamie. I'm going to be a great dad. We're gonna move and things are gonna be different. He has the father and the mother. But when the kid goes upstairs and goes to sleep, what does he see? but a hand coming out of the closet. So it's a great horror story that isn't terrifying, but really just gets under your skin, makes you feel bad, makes you feel kind of sick for this kid. It's just wonderful. This is a great distilled piece of horror writing that I really recommend. Now, my number 8 pick for my most favorite horror comic of all time, the 2 volumes of Gideon Falls. Now, this is another one of the writers who I consider to be the best working in horror right now. His name is Jeff Lemire. He's written things like Sweet Tooth. And Gideon Falls is his first real foray into horror. Of course, Sweet Tooth had a lot of those elements, but this book is the first horror comic I ever really fell in love with. And it was so much fun rereading it back for this video, because Andrea Sorrentino is the artist on this book, and just look at some of the spreads. This is very early on, and this is incredible. How do you draw something like that? The panel structure is insane. You have really terrifying, oh my gosh, my book is creaking quite a lot. It's just such a wonderful story about anxiety, about another world that's mixing into this one. If you like Stranger Things, I think you'd really love this book. But the thing that this comic reminds me of the most is a Netflix show that's kind of confusing with some people. It's a German show called Dark. And I really do think that if you like Dark, you will also really like Gideon Falls. It's trippy as hell. You get a lot of mileage in the story. You get a lot of things to figure out. It keeps going and reaching new highs that you didn't even think were really possible. It's about this young man who keeps finding pieces of this thing called the Black Barn, what he finds out has been around for generations, and it reappears from time to time. He finds these little small pieces of it, and everyone doesn't believe him. You're like, what are you doing picking around all this junk from alleyways and trash? But it turns out they're all pieces to something way bigger. And as our character finds out, this isn't just an alternate dimension where it's a different reality. You have this monster, this absolutely horrifying thing called the Smiling Man, here to terrify you. And the characterization is wonderful. The art is some of the best. The layouts are absolutely insane in this story. And it's just incredible. As you can see, it's just... Andrea Sorrentino's just flexing in this book. Like, you don't need to be going this hard with the artwork. Some genuinely horrifying images. This is the type of book that doesn't really jump scare you that much, even though there are definitely jump scares in here. But it really gets under your skin and really has you guessing to find out what the fuck is going on here. You finish an issue and you're like, oh my god. I know it gets a little confusing for some people, but personally, I really love this book. I think it's wonderful. You get a lot of alternate reality stuff in here. I do think that the ending, like the last few issues, leaves something to be desired in how they wrap everything up. But I can also see how someone would not have a problem with how this book ended at all. It really just depends on what you're looking to get out of horror. And this might not be an all-time classic, the best comic ever, but this is the first horror comic I ever read, and it's really fucking good. So I'd recommend it to experience some of Lemire, and absolutely Andrea Sorrentino's art is just wonderful. Number 7 on my list of my favorite horror comics of all time, and that is Little Monsters by Jeff Lemire as well. And this one is a very different story with a different artist, Justin Eugen. His black and white art style is trippy as hell. It's really suited for this book. It captures the humanity of its characters, which is incredibly important because it's a dystopian horror about vampires that outlast the human race. And it is wonderful. And I think that's the best thing I can do to sell it. They find out that they're actually not the last humans on Earth, last beings on Earth, as they figure out that there's a group of humans that is remaining and hunting them down as they go through the ruins of the rest of humanity. It's a lot like Lord of the Flies as well, actually. So if you like the type of horror that stories like that devolve into, absolutely read this book. If not, just say, just for the art alone. The character designs alone are just incredible. Little Monsters is not what I was expecting, because I really don't like vampire stories. Like, if I see a vampire story, I'm like, god damn it, I know where this is going. But Little Monsters flips that entirely on its head. It doesn't even really matter that much that they're vampires. It's just this situation they're in that's absolutely terrifying even to humans, let alone vampires. It makes it so much more interesting. So that's my pick for number 7. This is another book I've talked about at length in my monthly overviews. Now, this is another James Tynion IV book. This is probably his main project. He said he wants to get it to 100 issues, and that is Something is Killing the Children. Now, this is a monster hunter story, something that leans more towards thriller than to horror. But you've probably heard of this one, it's incredibly popular. It's about this main character right here, Erica Slaughter, who was taken in by an organization who trains children to fight and hunt down monsters so they stop them from feeding upon other children. You're thinking, okay, cool, why isn't this organization just deploy adults? Why are we sending children to fight monsters? Well, that's a twist of the story. Only children can see these monsters. The dialogue in here is excellent. It's Tynion at the top of his game. I don't think issue by issue this is that satisfying. And just the monsters designs, oh my god. You get so much love for the characters. You get a lot of interesting development around the world and how things got to be the way they are. And this whole first book is about a story called Archer's Peak, where Erica Slaughter, the main character, finds this boy, James, and manages to save him from a situation where he was facing near certain death otherwise. But Something is Killing the Children is just, it's just wonderful. And as you go on to the story, it gets even broader. It doesn't feel like horror sometimes because this is going to be a big story. This is something like the classic Vertigo titles that I loved so much. And as you keep going through it, it just gets better. Like, look at this art right here. And it never loses that touch of, you know, Erica Slaughter hunting down monsters, trying to make the world a better place, but it can slow down on the horror and really deliver some really interesting scares. And you build the characters as well. You care for them. You don't like seeing them in these situations, but you like it at the same time. You know what I'm saying? This book's great. I hope to see all these deluxe editions come out so I can really just finish this story, because this is a good one. Now moving on, we have yet another one by James Tynion IV. And this one is called The Nice House on the Lake. This is my favorite that he's done. It's not for everyone, I'll say that, but The Nice House on the Lake is a story about the apocalypse. It's about 10 individuals who have all had interactions with a certain man in bars who asks them a question, who asks them about the end of the world. This man's name is Walter, and no one really knows a lot about him, but he apparently is very rich, and he gets these 10 people together at this nice house on the lake, a very nice house on the lake, imagine even. And once they go to this nice house on the lake, they find out that Walter's not there, but all these people who have never met but are friends of Walter's are. And now what's the problem? Well, the problem is, as soon as they get there and stay a while, on their phones they find out that while they're all safe in this nice house, the world is literally going to shit. People are burning alive, social media is on fire, there are zombies, it's the apocalypse, everyone's dying, and they don't have any way to know what's going on. So these 10 people have to figure out the mystery of not only the apocalypse, but also how to get out of this situation, or if they even want to get out of it. They want to figure out who Walter is. They want to figure out how they keep getting supplies and food to this strange house. And these people aren't incredibly at odds. They're all from different backgrounds, so it makes for really interesting characterization and drama even just innately. And again, the art, as you can see, is incredible. So I hope you'll check this one out. This is high up on my list for favorite horror comics. Because even though I think it does get very, very convoluted towards the end, I think it's still, with a premise like that, you really just can't go wrong. You're gonna write something interesting no matter what. And James Tynion is a really talented author. Don't try to read this in single issues though, you will be confused. Now my number 4 pick is going to be the Bone Orchard Mythos Saga. Another one by Jeff Lemire. It's my favorite book by Jeff Lemire. It's also his most recent one. Now this is not a conventional horror story. It's an interconnected horror universe. And the one I'm going to really be talking about today is Bone Orchard Mythos Tenements. Because I think this is the best one so far. It's also, as you can see, definitely the longest one they've done so far. But it's terrifying. It's structured almost like a video game and how it keeps escalating to new heights. This is where you find out a lot of the answers because you hint at these dark supernatural gods, and those are hinted at throughout 10,000 Black Feathers and through the passageway. What you don't know is how they tie together with ordinary people, or what's really going on with these gods. How do they work? How do they function? Like, what do they want? No one knows. But Tenement finally gives you some of those answers. Tenement is a story that surrounds, a bunch of neighbors in a really run-down tenement apartment, as you can see. They figure out that one day, one of their neighbors goes missing. This is another story like Gideon Falls, probably why I like it so much, that goes into an alternate reality. The art in here, I think, is better than it's ever been with Sorrentino. These people find themselves in another universe through the walls of this rundown tenement. There's a strange passageway they go through to try and figure out the secrets of this, led by this 12-year-old kid. So they go through, and each level of this other universe is harsher and more terrifying than the last. They go through vampire monsters to a deadly labyrinth to hell itself, basically. And it's super fun horror. It's constantly keeping you guessing in the same way that Gideon Falls did. Also making you care about the characters faster than I ever cared about anyone in Gideon Falls, to be honest. You get to answers way faster. This book is everything I really want in a horror story. Absolutely. I love seeing alternate dimensions and people developing as I go through terrifying situations, and who these gods are that are tormenting these people on Earth and how it all connects. And that is, of course, the central thesis of Bone Orchard Mythos Tenements. Like I said, Jeff Lemire is absolutely one of the best writers in horror right now. And I believe that Tenement is just a strong comics, man. It's just a good comics. Yeah, so definitely check that out. And I can't wait for Starseed, the next installment, to come out. Whatever Jeff Lemire decides, you know what? I want to continue the series. I want to write horror again. Now, for my number 4 greatest horror comic of all time, I pick Severed by Scott Snyder. Now, Scott Snyder is the third of what I consider the greatest horror comic writers of our time. He's also a damn good writer across the board. Check out Absolute Batman. I read the first issue of that. That's an amazing series. He has lots of strengths, Scott Snyder. And Severed was the first time I figured out he could write some damn good horror. Severed was the first book of his that I really fell in love with. Because Scott Snyder's stuff was absolutely just sensational. It was magic. Scott Snyder can take a story that anyone can relate to about human suffering, about escaping from one home and wanting to find another, about hitchhiking across 1940s America. Sorry, not 1940s. He went further back. It's 1916. That the story Severed takes place in. Now, what's Severed about? Well, I hinted at it. Severed is done, first of all, in this great watercolor, super detailed art style. And to be clear, this book is something special because it's not just creepy horror that's there to scare you and that's it. You get genuinely attached to the characters here, probably more so than any other book, I really cared about this kid and wanted to see him escape from his abusive father, get on this train. You know, he has a romance with another boy he meets here. This, to me, is a thesis statement on how horror can not only be a source of, you know, getting under people's skin, but a great source of storytelling alone. It can have stakes, it can have complex relationships, it can have beauty, like any other genre, really. I think there are limitless potentials in all of these books, and Scott Snyder's was the first time I realized you can have genuinely really well-written characters and get super attached to them to the point that you really want to make sure that they survive to the end of the story, even though you know realistically that that's probably not going to happen. And I think this is probably Scott Snyder's most underrated book. I really enjoyed this one. Now, my number 3 pick for my favorite horror comic of all time is, of course, absolute Batman Arkham Asylum. This is the only superhero book on my list, and I think that's for a very specific reason. Because superhero books usually don't employ horror successfully. It's an incredible accomplishment to turn a superhero book into a genuine horror. That's what I applaud J.M. DeMatteis for doing when he wrote Kraven's Last Hunt. I thought that was wonderful. You really felt all the feelings that you normally feel if it's a horror series. What's so interesting about Batman Arkham Asylum is how dark everything feels. You despair so much throughout this book. It's really incredible. You don't know if Batman is sane, if anyone's sane in this. You don't know if there's a larger story or if Batman's just wandering through the darkness. You have no idea about really anything. Which is what I think makes this book such an interesting read. This also represents the Vertigo era of horror. It reminds me of a lot of great horror books from that time, like Neil Gaiman's Sandman, one of my favorite series. I won't call it horror. It has some horror issues, some horror elements in it. Sandman has some great horror issues. Hellblazer up here, that's the only one not covered by the web. That has some great horror issues with John Constantine. And, you know, Swamp Thing as well is up there in the corner. And also, there were these one-shots that were strictly horror. There was Peter Milligan, who did Shade the Changing Man. He did a book called Face. It made me terrified of plastic surgery for a while. But Arkham Asylum really captures this time period that was strictly the 90s of Vertigo horror, where everything felt trippy and new and interesting and just insane. You never really knew what was going to happen next. Things would bend into prose and poetry and back into comics and then back into an image, a full-page image that you weren't even sure what you were looking at. It was just wonderful to me. And this book is what embodies that. I love that era of Vertigo comics so much. It's maybe my favorite era in all of comics. Actually, in terms of DC comics, Vertigo is absolutely my favorite era. All my favorite stories from DC, Vertigo. It does something so interesting with Batman and his characters. It makes you see for a second just how dark these stories of this character might actually be. It made me feel a way that I'd never had before in terms of Batman and his adventures and the Joker and all these crazy villains that you never see as crazy because they're comic book crazy. They're not real world crazy. This makes them terrifying. Now, my number 2 pick for my favorite horror comic of all time is actually Noctera by Scott Snyder. I could really put any of Scott Snyder's books that really delve into horror and have a point, because I was seeing on an interview with Scott Snyder, he really understands horror better than any other writer in comics, in my opinion. He knows that there are certain things that get under your skin because they're truths about the world that we don't want to face. We have the irrational fear as children that maybe, just maybe, our parents are only raising us so they can trade us off, or so they can eat us, or so, you know, they can fulfill a deal they made and they don't actually love us. And, you know, in our worst moments and our nightmares, and even though those fears are stupid, you can turn that into horror, and you can do it really effectively because people do believe those things, or not even believe it, but there's some doubt in their heads that this horrible thing might just happen, because they can't know that it won't. This doesn't entirely apply to Nocterra, because Nocterra's more of a thriller than a horror, but it's a super fun one. The art in here is absolutely gorgeous. Scott Snyder's working with a great artist here. He has some really grotesque monsters. The characters are all incredibly well realized. This is a world where the sun just no longer exists, and the shadows infect everything around them. If you get caught in the shadows for too long with no light, you become this monster, like this guy right here. Which, he's a fucking amazing character. This guy cracks me up, man. Just a super fun character in this grim sci-fi horror. And the characters have a ton of hearts. You know, his name is Blacktop Bill. And he is merciless, but also just so much fun as a villain. It's kind of a, like, Grand Theft Auto sort of adventure too, like a road adventure, as you're going through in these cars, like running through all sorts of monsters, and just super interesting plot twists. I really wanted a deluxe edition of this, but I couldn't hold off because I really do love this story so much. It's a bit slow at some points, but you can always tell it's Scott Snyder. It's going to pick back up. I really love this one, man. I really did. It's pretty excellent. It's pretty horrifying as well. Nocterra is just great, and no one talks about it. Maybe I'm the only one that likes it. I don't know, but this is wonderful to me. It's a sci-fi dystopia, a road trip, and a monster movie. Come on, man! Like, come on! It's good. Nocterra is wonderful. And now I have an honorable mention before I go on to my number one pick. My favorite horror comic, what I think is the best horror comic of all time. And that is Dark Ride by Joshua Williamson. Now, Dark Ride is a story about an amusement park. And the thesis statement of this book is super funny. It's basically, what would happen if Walt Disney sold his soul to the devil? Because that's what happens right away in here. We have the devil himself and someone who looks suspiciously like Walt Disney with the same signature mustache in black and white, making a deal with him. And as you can see later on in the book, the deal resulted in this, a horror theme park. It's a very modern book. You have like people walking around being dickheads on social media, like vlogging and shit like that, live streaming. And you figure out that the mascots in here are actually working for the devil himself. The deal that this Walt Disney look-alike made to create Devilland, as it's called, is that he gets to claim the souls of a few people on the theme park. So people start going missing. Roller coasters lead to, you know, the pits of hell. And some people start investigating. And it not only has that story, which is super fun, the theme parks are really well realized. You can tell Josh Williamson has a lot of fun really making up, oh, if there actually was the scariest theme park on earth, what would that look like? And you can believe it, the way that he's realized it. But it also manages to have a family drama amongst the people who inherit it. It reminded me of Succession almost, the way they were fighting about who is going to succeed Devilland. And yeah, they're just assholes to each other. The art's wonderful. It's super fun. There's nothing not to like about Dark Ride. It's just, it masters just the art of fun horror. And I think that's something I've missed quite a bit. My number one pick for my favorite horror comic of all time is Barry Windsor Smith's masterpiece, Monsters. This book took him 35 years to actually complete. And it's sensational. It's done in this beautiful brush ink style, all black and white as well. And if you've seen the movie Poor Things, it's very similar to that in some ways. Monsters is about a kid named Bobby Bailey who had a really rough home life with an abusive father and a mother who was a bit complacent. It was just miserable, and it focused on the effects of war, his backstory. And you don't find out who he is at the start of the book. You just know that he's desperate to join the military. This little kid named Bobby Bailey. And they say, okay, well, he has no family connections. We're going to send him to a mission, experiments. And the guy who is responsible for that felt so ashamed that he sent this poor kid, Bobby Bailey, to basically be turned into a monster in this government experiment, because that's what ends up happening. That he goes on a search to find out what exactly would happen to Bobby, where he's going to go, now that the experiment's gone horribly wrong and he's been turned into the figure that you see on the book right here. It's just utterly horrifying. It's a story about abuse, about coming to terms with the past, the cycle that trauma can create. Barry Windsor Smith really delves into it so beautifully here. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the backstory of this book because it's very interesting. Barry Windsor Smith is the same guy who did Wolverine, who had a Hulk story at one time. And that's what this book started as, a Hulk story. He wanted to explore Bruce Banner's past and make a really interesting story about the abuse that he suffered that created this monster as a defense mechanism. And that's a lot of what Monsters is about. And it goes into so much more detail than that. It's really amazing. It's exceptionally well written and really just an all-around masterpiece of a book. I'd say this is a 10 out of 10 series, and it's just absolutely wonderful. If what I said at all about Monsters sounds remotely interesting to you, I implore you to pick this up because I do love this book. I think it's miraculous. A really great achievement here. And I do think it's like the movie Poor Things in that you see these torturous results of broken relationships and broken promises and the trauma of all of it, of just a monster that used to be man trying to find his way in this world and trying to discover if he has any humanity left in them. It's really compelling. It delves into probably the most human drama I've ever seen in any sort of horror, whether it be comics or movies or prose or anything like that. It's just wonderful. I don't think there will ever be a horror book that really beats Monsters for me because it's just that good. Alright, that'll do it for my top 10 favorite horror comics of all time. I appreciate you guys, whoever watched this video to the end. I really thank you. I meant to do a lot more talking about horror comics throughout, the month of October, but it didn't feel like October at all to me personally. We had hurricanes and disasters and things just got in the way. Life got in the way. I will still have a video up pretty soon. I still have to record it. But the comics that I ordered this month, I have the box ready to open, so I'm going to, do that pretty soon, and that should be a lot of fun. Hopefully I'll be able to expand to, create some more content for you guys that's a little bit more variety than just opening comics and reviewing them and talking about them, even though I do love to do that. But happy Halloween. I know this is probably going to be posted the day after Halloween. I apologize for that. But, I wanted to, have some fun that day. It didn't feel right to do it before. That'd be inauthentic of me, wouldn't it? So it's a split up across 2 days of filming. But yes, I really appreciate you guys watching the video. And I hope you had a great Halloween. And I also hope that you check out some of the 10 books that I talked about today. Thanks for watching, guys. Thank you.